Welcome to an exciting episode of Articulated Points. Now, if you've been with us a while, you know we used to have like 3 or 4 topics per Articulated Point episode. Those meant we had really long videos and not everybody was really willing to sit through. So we're going to change it up a little bit, and now we're just going to do single topic Articulated Point episodes, but it'll be both with me and Patrick. Say hi, Patrick.
Hey, how's it going?
All right. So this way, our videos are hopefully a little more engaging and get a little more engagement. But today we're going to do the first part of a series, and it's continuing on from our previous month's talking point episode. We're going to dive deep into Sergeant Savage.
Yeah, I think I dove pretty deep into it last month, but as I did that, I was going through, like, you could see, like, here's a folder, and I just have like these marks here where I realized as I was going that it was going to be a 3-hour talking point, and that was just never going to fly.
So I think this episode we're going to focus more on pre-production, and then hopefully next month, we'll do the canceled stuff.
Sure, a little bit. I think we'll follow the timeline and just kind of cut it off there.
All right, sounds good. Take it away.
Okay, so one of the earliest things that I have for Sergeant Savage is a study of exactly how they were planning on doing the articulation. They put forth a couple of ideas. I covered in the talking point that they were looking to compete with other toy lines that were popular at the time. They even went back as far as He-Man to look at how that was constructed, and they kind of kicked around ideas of changing G.I. Joe entirely. There are several different ideas that they had for arm articulation, and some of them even include just having a wire insert frame, so the arms may have actually worked kind of like a bendy figure, which would have been...
Terrible is the word I think we're going for.
Yeah, that wouldn't have... I think that they realized quickly that wasn't going to work that well.
5 years down the road, you've got decaying rubber on a metal wire.
Yeah, absolutely. Look at how globulous some of those are suffering. They like seep that green ooze out of them, and it's because of the reaction with the copper wire and the plastic. Of course, whenever they're doing this, I'm sure that they're measuring, how much do we want to be able to have sculpting, like human sculpting on the arms, versus how much do we want it to bend and have rivets showing rather than human anatomy.
Now, one of these shots looks like they took out the swivel arm battle grip. Now, do you think that is going back to the straight arms in that illustration, or is it possible they were moving into a plug for the lower arms, so it would still retain the rotation, but it would just be underneath the bicep?
Yeah, I think that they were thinking about chopping out the swivel arm battle grip, because actually by the time that we get to what will probably be in the next episode, Sergeant Savage was going to actually lose some articulation in some of the canceled stuff, but not from the initial plan that this was following, which is a little confusing. If you go back to our timeline, it's almost like there's 2 eras of canceled things. The canceled things prior to that shift in the company, and the canceled things whenever Savage was just entirely canceled itself.
Okay.
One of the ones that I think is the most interesting is this one where it says arm pivots within pecs. It's kind of like the butterfly joint that we see in modern figures, and it really would have been interesting if that had been something that Sergeant Savage had done way back when, because the figures were, as they were bigger, there probably was more room for articulation.
Yeah, that actually was surprising to see. Like, that's not a joint you really get standardized until another 10 years down the line when Toy Biz is doing their Marvel Legends.
Yeah, so it's weird to see it here sketched out and ready to go for Sergeant Savage. But I'm sure that cost was a factor, because we also have this picture where they're talking about the figures being able to be sonic welded together rather than using a screw. And the picture that calls out the bar in the middle as being a vinyl dog bone rather than being the metal T-hook that we were all accustomed to.
I have to say, I do appreciate the forward thinking of trying to get rid of the rubber band and T-hook. The O-ring and T-hook. I know that's kind of a controversial decision, but even back then, that was obviously the weak link in a figure's construction. Though I don't think they were doing it for more, let's say, charitable reasons of toy ownership, but really for cost.
Yeah, the weak point in the Sergeant Savage figures is the hips. in my opinion. That's where it's the weakest. And actually, we'll look a little bit more about that later. They were quite aware that there was an issue with the hips. But moving on, here I have with me an internal document that was created by Kirk Bazigian. And I think that what the purpose of this is to kind of pitch how he wanted the Sergeant Savage segment to go, and to get the designers eager to have the creative juices flowing and to think of what all could be in this line. And essentially, the beginning of it is a message from Hawk, and it's supposed to be from his personal journal, and he talks about who Savage is, where he came from, and why Sergeant Savage is awesome. And then it talks a little bit about Savage making a secret raid on a base. And in the early draft here, it was actually Dr. Mindbender's lab that Sergeant Savage raided. And he found out that Dr. Mindbender had been working with General Blitz. But early on, General Blitz was not called General Blitz. He's Dr. Strom in the cartoon in his doctor format, which is the kind of the secret identity of him. And in this, he is referred to as Dr. Caligari.
Like the cabinet of Dr. Caligari.
Exactly. Yes, the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the 1920 German expressionist film that is considered one of the earliest examples of modern horror films. It's kind of interesting to see some of the parallels as well. I took a look to see what was in the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and part of the story actually involves there being a man in a coffin, in a cabinet rather, that is kept asleep and then awakened by Dr. Caligari, which parallels Sergeant Savage just a little bit. So it's interesting that that was something that was an early name for General Blitz. Comparisons don't really stop there, because I'm glad that you said the cabinet of Dr. Caligari so quickly, because there's actually an early name for the Iron Army. Instead, it is called the Shadow Cabinet. One of the parts of this is not just Hawk's memos, but there's also a combat report from Sergeant Savage. And this document is dated January 93, which is when I think it was actually distributed around Hasbro in January. But they pretended as if Sergeant Savage had written this himself the prior December. And he runs down the various types of members of the Shadow Cabinet that he's aware of. And I think that this was just like basic ideas that were being pitched to be enemies of Sergeant Savage within the toy line. And some of them kind of fit with other things that G.I. Joe was getting into at the time. But let me just kind of run down what they are. Does that work?
Sure.
Okay. The first one is the Shadow Knights. You can't tell where the man ends and the machine begins.
It's creepy.
Yeah, I don't know really what is going on here. It almost feels a little bit like the Techno Walkers or Armor Tech or Transformers Action Masters. I'm not really sure what the idea would have been. It looks almost like cyborgs.
Yeah, the head looks very Terminator-y.
It does, yeah. And I don't know where this art comes from either. I don't know who sketched these out, or if somebody else, like if somebody was helping Kirk with this pitch. The next one is the Night Shifters. 1 minute you're fighting the enemy, and the next minute you're fighting yourself. These shape-changing synthoids can mimic any object or person with a twist of a belt-mounted gizmo.
Synthozoids.
Oh, synthozoid, not synthoid. So what does that sound like? That sounds like something actually kind of specific to me. Sounds a little bit like the Replicators, to be honest.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they just had this idea of taking the G.I. Joe characters and having them be the standard form of things, and then having it turn into a monster, but they needed to work it into a story. So, whenever you have an idea and it doesn't launch, sometimes you revise it and try to see if it will fit later.
Yeah, take the elements that work and go from there.
And then you have the Shadow Guardians. Just one of these genetically enhanced Super Palookas was enough to shred my retrofitted Panzer with his bare hands. Imagine what a whole platoon of these jokers could do. Yeah, I really don't know what this was supposed to be other than a large action figure.
It's a bat.
Yeah. I really don't know. Then we have the Shadow Pack. I knocked one of these 20-foot behemoths on his can. On impact, he splits into 7 smaller versions of himself and knocked my jaw into next Tuesday. No matter how you slice him, the boogeyman's bad news.
I don't know how they'd make that work as a toy.
Honestly, I kind of wonder if it wasn't the idea of just using the Hall of Fame bodies.
Yeah, but splitting into 7 smaller versions. There's a very specific wording there.
Yeah, so maybe they were just seeing how popular combiners were with Transformers and hoping that you could have combiner G.I. Joes.
Well, power to you if you can pull it off, but ooh, that is a technological puzzle there.
Yeah, this is some weird stuff. I really enjoy this page just because it's really pretty far out and kind of shows how far they were willing to go with various concepts. And it seems like some of this stuff was recycled, but for the most part, they went a more realistic direction with Sergeant Savage. Throw things out there and see what sticks, which wasn't a lot that stuck.
See the control number at the bottom there?
No.
THX1138.
Oh, yeah. It says THX1138. So clearly he was thinking this stuff should be a movie.
George Lucas gonna sue somebody.
Yeah. In Abernathy's notes, he also talks about the rest of the team. We have a character that was dropped from the roster altogether, and I haven't seen anything else regarding him. I don't know if this became somebody else. I'm not quite sure on that. Maybe we can read this and figure it out.
Professor, this guy keeps the whole gang in stitches. He specializes in blowing things up and blowing things off. He's great in a fight if you can get him to show up. And his expert medical background makes him the perfect man to help Savage unravel the mystery of his past and also to keep tabs on his 72-hour doses of recombinant enzyme compound. Rumor has it Professor once worked for a toy manufacturer. Gee, I wonder which manufacturer in Pawtucket, Rhode Island that would be.
Yeah, maybe this became Dynamite?
Well, in the cartoon, this would definitely be Doc. So I'm guessing that's probably where they went with it.
There's definitely the fact that they have Doc around, for sure. Yeah, but the character that likes to blow things up would be Dynamite. So maybe this just got split off and they decided to separate that out.
Yeah, well, that would make sense to me.
But whenever it finally came time to put Sergeant Savage to paper and to really draw what the characters were going to look like, they had Joe Kubert do the designs. And not only did he do the designs, the concept designs of the characters, but he also then translated those into designs for the cartoon. And we can take a look at some of those, but his designs for the cartoon are not the ones that got used. So I have some concept sketches from the actual cartoon as well. So let's take a look there.
Let's do it.
If you look at D-Day, you could see that the difference between his concept sketches for the characters and then his character models for the cartoon are mostly a matter of shading. It looks like he refined the edges.
I would say he also made the characters a little softer. Like looking at the cuffs on D-Day's pants. They're a little simplified, but also a little rounder than he puts on in his full sketch there.
Yeah. And it is interesting how, like, D-Day has the mention of the tattoo on his forearm. That tattoo actually made it to the card art, which isn't surprising because Joe Kubert did the package art as well. You can even see in the animation model, he was not expecting the animators to keep drawing that in, so it was dropped from animation.
Of course, the figure himself has long sleeves down to the wrists, so you wouldn't tell anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point. So maybe he does have the tattoo. It's just covered with a sleeve.
That's right.
But then we have Dynamite, and this is interesting to me because some of the early sketches for the Dynamite action figure actually don't have him with just a headband. It's an entire bandana covering his whole head. But if this is the Kubert early design, I have to think that they considered having him have the bandana, but then went back and just gave him the headband that Kubert had originally thought of. And it's interesting also to see all the notes that Kubert put in, so that he kind of explained what all was going into this. And it looks like Dynamite is just trying to blow out a stick of dynamite, which really wouldn't work.
Maybe he's blowing on it to give it more oxygen.
Sure, he's making it go faster. Sure. And then we have a revised piece of art that was what was used, or was an earlier version, I should say, of what was used for the animation. You can really see where things got quite different.
Yeah, it's both simplifying the design down a lot, but also rearranging the pouch and torso design layout. So it's kind of doesn't really match the figure, doesn't match the Kubert design.
Yeah, and there's a lot of exaggeration of things here. I can kind of see why they may have wanted to exaggerate things. You have a lot of characters wearing green, which, in my opinion, one of the things I like about that is it almost was a return to 1982, but there was a reason why they departed from that in the following years. And there kind of needed to be a little more color, I think, to the figures. I think that's one of the things that they benefit from their Wave 2, especially Dynamite. And I wonder what the show would have been like if it had actually used the original Kubert designs. It might have looked a little more intended for an older audience, which is not what I think they wanted.
Yeah, but I think also at the same time, if they had gone with the Kubert designs, it would probably be a lot better known today.
I agree. I completely agree with that. But you can also see the art for Sergeant Savage, and I guess in the animation model, they dropped the dog tags swinging to the side, and he gave some very basic outlines for all of the weapons that characters are carrying. I guess he kind of knew that those would not be a part of that character's particular look, that those would be something that would be drawn separately.
Well, yeah, those would have their own animation models later on, so there's no point in putting a lot of detail on those.
Yeah, and I have a book full of those, which I've taken with me to conventions, but I don't think that we have time to look through all of that.
we really want to lose our audience.
It's like, here's the screwdriver. Yeah. We maybe can post some of those at a different time. But then of the models that ended up in there, there's an earlier version of Savage, and I like that it points to the square bicep and just says, "What is this?"
It's called art.
And then that is not there in the final version. And then I only have one picture of the revised animation version of Grill, and it doesn't really show us too much about his character, other than he's wearing a t-shirt and he's muscular. He has a t-shirt on and pants.
Yeah.
And then we also have the other similar image we have to go along with that is Mouse. I don't really have another character model for Mouse from the cartoon. I don't think Mouse has a Kubert art design. It looks like they had moved on to having somebody else finish out the designs before Kubert did that one. And looking at what was going on with the figures, I don't think he conceptualized that one either as a figure. But then we also have Lady J. And one of the interesting things actually that exists within all of the pitch stuff is that there was supposed to be a complicated but romantic relationship happening between Lady J and Sergeant Savage. And I don't think that many of the people watching this would take too kindly to that, especially since a new Flint figure was supposed to be coming out as well.
Love triangle.
It would have been weird. But she was going to be on the team, a team member of Sergeant Savage's. In Abernathy's notes, she took a swing at Savage on their first meeting, and it connected. I think Savage is in love. Despite the initial friction, when these two work together, the unit functions like a well-oiled machine. Not much is said about Lady J. I guess maybe it doesn't need to be because she's an existing character.
Sure.
They just needed to tell you how she fits in on the team.
And keep in mind, when this was probably written, Lady J was still showing up in reruns of Deke all the time, so.
That's a good point. Yeah, she was kind of the character that kids may have still been familiar with. And I do like that Lady J actually has all of her spears. They did draw what those should look like in the cartoon whenever she uses them.
Yeah, it's a step further than the old Sunbow cartoon, which just kind of had the same generic head for all of them.
Yeah, for sure. Iron Stormtrooper kind of has a couple of different looks, but the Iron Stormtrooper actually did look very different in the flashbacks of the episode versus what was happening in the present day version of the episode. So there were a couple of different Iron Stormtroopers in there. Whether or not you'd call both of them the Iron Stormtrooper or maybe give one of them a different name, I don't know. But in this, the concept just calls both of them Stormtrooper. Some of the most interesting stuff as far as character design goes is probably General Blitz, because there's some very different looking art for the cyborg version of General Blitz. Because in the end, I guess in the intro, it shows him as the giant cyborg that Savage punches through the stomach of and destroys. But then in the episode, you see the story part where he is revealed as having kept himself alive through the use of robotics.
Boy, that intro really spoils a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. But yeah, there's a couple of very different looks for what he could be in here. I don't know why, but the version that ended up in there is referred to as the Moonwalker version. Why would that be called the Moonwalker version?
Do you remember the Michael Jackson Moonwalker movie and or arcade cabinet game?
I remember it being a thing. I've never played it.
At the end of the movie, he kind of turns into himself in a mech.
Oh.
You're having me dig up 30-year-old memories here. Yeah, here we go.
So I look at this thing and I think he kind of looks like a Gundam. Are you telling me that he was actually supposed to look like Michael Jackson?
Let me just throw something in the chat here real quick.
Yeah, so he turned into a mech in the end of that. I guess that's the idea, is that General Blitz turns into a mech similar to Michael Jackson.
I mean, that's probably just where they're getting inspiration from, but...
Right. Take inspiration from all areas, I guess, is the lesson.
I mean, it even happens in the arcade game. That's like your power-up move.
Yeah, that's not what I would have expected, but it says right there on the concept sheet. Krieger transformation, quote, Moonwalker version.
And so I guess that's where they're going with this Krieger one.
Yeah, he still looks like a Gundam to me.
Well, I don't know where they got their inspiration for the design of the Michael Jackson one, so,
That's a good point. But it's not the only character model in here either. There's also this other version that says End of Krieger Transformation. And it has all sorts of blades.
Yeah, this gives me like early 90s Image vibes.
Me too. Yeah, I'm thinking the same thing. Like, this looks like something that would have been tossed into a comic book and just called a mutant.
Yeah, very weird.
Then there's another one that looks like it takes it a step further, because it's version 2, Krieger Transformation, and then he has several circular saw blades at the end of his arm, and it looks like spikes and stuff on his shoulders, and a gun now, and an axe on his left arm that may also be a gun.
And now I'm getting Stallone Judge Dredd vibes.
Yeah.
So maybe they're hitting up 2000 AD a little bit.
So all some very weird stuff going on with General Blitz.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to stop for now. There is still plenty left, but we'll get to that in the future. If you like this episode, please clip and save by clicking subscribe. Leave a comment below. We love to read those. And thanks again.
All right, we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching this episode of Articulated Points. We hope you enjoyed it. And we'd appreciate it if you would like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to learn more about some of the toys featured in this episode or want to follow us on social media, links are in the description below this video.